Let
Let
me
me
click
just
on that.
yeah.
There.
Yeah. I'm going to go through the slide deck, and I don't have like a ton of content, so I'm hoping there's some questions and I can show off some stuff, but I'm going to go through the slide deck and kind of talk about Homestead, and then I can show a few different examples, and then we can go from there.
Sounds good. All right, you are full screen and we're ready when you are.
All right, let me start this up. Okay, so just for reference, I can't see anything in chat or anything because Keynote is dumb and is now taking over all 4 of my displays. So feel free to stop me at any time with a question.
Okay.
All right, so this talk is, and actually the slide deck is, if you've seen the Nomad PHP talk that I did recently about Homestead, I'm going to kind of go over a little bit more detail of that talk. That was a 10-minute talk. I think I ended up spending like 13 or 14 minutes on it. But Homestead is a really awesome tool that I am a big fan of. I also recently became a maintainer of the project, so I help Taylor Otwell merge PRs and figure out what's wrong. I do a lot of troubleshooting and I do a lot of support for Homestead. So it's kind of a project that's become very near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited about it, and I'm always eager to share some of the cool things that people may not know about it. Who am I? I'm Joe Ferguson. I'm a PHP developer for AOL. You can find me on Twitter at Joe P. Ferguson. I'm the organizer for Memphis PHP. I'm also involved with Nomad PHP, OSMI, and I'm really passionate about community projects and community engagement. So do you guys know of Vagrant, or is anybody overly familiar with Vagrant?
I am. I use it every day.
Okay. Is anybody completely new to it?
No. I need to do that for a while.
I install it and fire up the Homestead box. That's my extent.
Okay. Excellent. We're going to go over a little bit about what it is. Vagrant is essentially just a tool for managing virtual machines. It's a Ruby app written by an awesome company called HashiCorp, and it's completely free software. It runs on Mac, Linux, and Windows. It uses these things called providers, and the most common one is Virtualbox, mainly because it's free. You can also run Vagrant with VMware Fusion on a Mac, or VMware Desktop, which is actually called Workstation on Windows. And there's also Parallels on Mac, which is another tool for running and managing virtual machines. So Vagrant utilizes the APIs that these tools expose to manage virtual machines on your system. So they do that with the different API calls, and it's essentially just API magic. You don't have to really worry about what's happening here. If you ever get a really hard error or a bad error, it's really easy to kind of blow everything away and reset everything. So you don't really have to worry or concern yourself too much of what's actually happening under the hood, which is good for people who don't like messing with servers or virtual machines. And it runs anywhere almost. It runs on Mac, Windows, Linux are the big supported platforms. I'm sure there's some variations of Linux out there that it doesn't run on, but for the most part, you can run it anywhere. When it came time for Laravel to build a local development environment for the Laravel framework itself, it was kind of a decision to use some kind of environment that they can control and that they could express a lot of opinions about. Like every full stack framework, Laravel is a very opinionated framework. It has a lot of opinions and a lot of defaults that that you can safely use and build software with. Well, when it came time to build a Vagrant environment or a development environment, they went with Vagrant because you can highly customize that really easily. And it really kind of embodied the same ease of use and customization abilities that the framework itself embodies as well. So why should you use Homestead versus any other Vagrant box that's out there? Well, this is probably a few months old now, the screenshot, but when I took the screenshot, Laravel had, the Homestead box had over 9 million downloads. It's number 2 on the Virtualbox providers for boxes that are out there. The number 1 is the Ubuntu Trusty 64, which is their 1404 version with 24 million downloads. I'll take being number 2. That's pretty awesome, I think. The next closest is HashiCorp's 1204 box with 6 million downloads. They actually, HashiCorp, who hosts these box on their site, actually emailed Taylor a few months ago and asked him about the possibility of not really hosting these boxes on their infrastructure anymore. And it was kind of amusing to find out the kind of capacity and how much downloads we were using. I think 1 month Homestead was responsible for 65 terabytes out of their network. And the reason they emailed was that infrastructure gets attacked a lot, so they were trying to consolidate it. So yeah, it's interesting to know that in one 30-day period or 1 month, we peaked at some ridiculous amount of traffic. It was kind of funny. So what is a Vagrant box? Well, if you're familiar with virtual machines or VMware or any of these hypervisor software applications like Virtualbox or anything, you know that you can take a snapshot of a box. And a snapshot of a box is kind of a compressed image into a specific format, which isn't really a special format. It's essentially a zip file that's easily transported and imported. So you could configure a virtual machine, take a snapshot of it, send it to a coworker, send it to a colleague, and they can extract it and install that virtual machine onto their system, and it'll spin up in the exact same point in time that it was taken. Well, Vagrant has done all of this in an easily repeatable and easily customizable way. These boxes are essentially snapshots of the virtual machines at a point in time. And when you download and install a box, it's copied to a hidden folder on your hard drive. And when you spin up a new Vagrant machine, it's copied from there. So you can copy or install a virtual machine. Sorry, you can spin up a Vagrant machine, completely do whatever you want and change it, and go to a different project, spin up another version, and you'll get a clean instance every time. You can isolate them, or you can use multiple projects in one. And we'll show you how Homestead handles that. Essentially, all you need to be concerned about a box is it's a snapshot of a virtual machine in a point in time. So what all is in Homestead? Well, it's based on Ubuntu 16.04. It has PHP 7.1. There's still HHVM in there. Even though Laravel dropped support for HHVM, HHVM is still in there. It's probably going to go away in Homestead pretty soon. There's not a lot of people out there using it. It has Nginx, MySQL. You can use MariaDB if you prefer. We have Postgres and SQLite compatibility installed. Composer is already in there for you. Node.js, Bower, Grunt, Gulp. All kinds of queue management tools like Beanstalk, Redis, also Memcache is already there. And all of this stuff is configured for you out of the box. There's very little you have to do to actually spin up an instance of this virtual machine. So starting from scratch, you want to make sure you install VirtualBox 5.1. If you already have an old version of VirtualBox, make sure you go and check the version. We have a lot of people that we get bug reports from that say, I'm using the latest version of VirtualBox, but if they actually go check their version, they're using the latest version of 5.0. And there actually has been some changes in 5.1 that you need to be running 5.1 to take advantage of some of the newer Vagrant boxes out there. Make sure you install the VirtualBox extensions. It's a separate download from VirtualBox. And then you can install Vagrant. And this is the free way of doing it. You can also use VMware or Parallels. Either one of those will work fine with Homestead. There are some caveats on each side. Obviously, Parallels, you're only going to be able to run it on a Mac. VMware has some networking oddities that aren't really easy to always know what IPs you're going to be assigning due to the fact that they actually virtualize a network switch in the hypervisor. So it's a little bit more convoluted. So we're going to stick with VirtualBox. So you can clone down the Homestead repo, and it's github.com/Laravel/Homestead. You would clone that down into somewhere, a generic place. I have it set up in all my different PHP projects alongside. And when you do that, you run this bash.init.sh script, or bash init sh, and it will install Homestead. And that's all there is to it. It's all you have to do to actually install it. What that actually did was created a .homestead folder in your user's home folder, and that'll work whether you're on Windows, Linux, or Mac. If you're on Windows, you would actually run the init.bat file. We have one specifically for Windows. If you look at that folder that we created, you'll see that there's 3 files. There's this Homestead YAML, which this is the core of what you'll be editing to manipulate Homestead. There's also an aliases file, which allows you to set up bash shortcuts that will be installed into the VM for you. So if there's a bash command that you're running over and over and over, you can put that in the aliases and it'll get copied into the VM. There's also this after.sh script. That's for doing any customizations that you may need that doesn't come with Homestead. If you want to play around with some other thing that Homestead doesn't offer, you can add the commands to install and configure it there, and it'll run whenever you provision the machine. So here we're setting up the virtual machine that we're going to be using in VirtualBox. So the provider is VirtualBox. We're going to give it 1 CPU. We're going to give it 2 gigs of RAM, and we're going to tell it that we want the IP to be .10.10. The authorizing keys are, this is just the SSH keys we're going to use for Homestead and to for the Vagrant machine itself. You can set these to any keys you want. Doesn't really matter. I just use my generic SSH keys. For folders, we're going to map this PHP Storm Project's Quick Start Basic folder to home/vagrant/QS in the virtual machine. This is really important because this is what is going to take the files on my host operating system, in this case my Mac, and map them into the Vagrant machine, which is going to be the Ubuntu. The sites folder is how we assign a site to that path that we just mapped in. So we're going to say quickstart.app is a fake domain name that we're going to use. We want to point that towards the public folder. Since this is a Laravel application, we want to point that public folder to where we have it mapped. Also, we can create databases here just by adding them to the list. There's also some other information usually in this homestead.yaml, such as ports and some other things that you can add that are optional. We'll cover some of that in a little bit. When you're launching Homestead, you would just change the directory into the Homestead folder that you clone down, and then you can just run Vagrant up. Now, an important thing to notice here is not really any of the SSH errors or any of the waiting for things to happen. The most important of this screen or this section is this forwarding port section. Homestead forwards a handful of ports for you automatically, which means it's going to bind port 8000 on your host, my Mac, to port 80 on the VM, which means we can go to localhost port 8000 and that will get sent to the VM on port 80. The same thing for 44,300. Same thing for 3306, which is MySQL. The 5432 is for Postgres, and the 22 is obviously for SSH. This allows us to easily connect to the services running in the VM without having to be in the VM or being in the VM and running at the command line. The rest of this is just the scripts that are running that are configuring the Nginx sites that are setting up the MySQL databases and the Postgres databases based on the information we told the homestead.yaml. The last thing we do is we update Composer just to make sure we're always using a most recent up-to-date version of Composer. Now, how we access Homestead is, even though we bind that 2222 to port 22, we don't have to SSH Vagrant at the IP. You can just say Vagrant SSH. This is just a shortcut that Vagrant gives you to connect to the machine. So if we Vagrant SSH in, we can check our PHP version. You can see that we're running PHP 7.1. And then we can CD into this QS folder, and then we can run our artisan migration command. So this is that folder. This is the project on my local system, but we're manipulating it and we're using it in the context of we're in this VM now. So when it runs PHP artisan migrate, which connects to my MySQL database and creates tables and sets everything up for me, it's doing it in the VM, not on my local machine. We then run PHP artisan DB seed, which is how you run Laravel's database seeders. And in this case, we just are going to seed some task data and some widget data. And then now we can access this localhost 8000 URL. And if we go to /users, you'll see that we have some fake users that were added. You can also access Homestead through something like SQL Pro or MySQL Workbench. The password is secret. The username is Homestead. Here we're going to connect to localhost because we have that port mapped, and we'll connect to 33060, and which will get translated to 3306 on the VM. And then we can go look at our users table, and we can see that we actually have user data because we ran our migrations and we ran our database seeders. So how do we stop Homestead when we're done? Well, you can exit out of the SSH session, then you can do Vagrant halt. If something happens and it's not acting right, or if it's not, if it's just being weird, or you're not sure what you've broken, but you're sure you've done something wrong, you can do a Vagrant destroy. And Vagrant destroy will actually blow up the machine and remove remove the hard drive and everything from your project. Now you can do a Vagrant up again, and you don't lose anything because your project is mapped in through the shared folders. And every time you do a Vagrant up, it copies that snapshot base box to your project folder. So you don't have to worry about having to pull or restore anything.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah.
When you destroy, is there a way to copy or to find the databases without being inside of Vagrant so that you can make copies of them in case you need to destroy the box, but you don't want to lose the databases?
Yeah, that's what to do that, what you would do would be to use something like SQL Pro and connect and then just do an export.
Right, but I'm saying if you're not, the only way that you can use SQL Pro to connect like that is if you've actually done Vagrant up and Vagrant's running. I'm talking about if Vagrant's not running. Find the databases, because I've had that problem where I've had something's gone wrong with my box, and I end up losing all the databases because I couldn't find them on the hard drive of my physical machine, but I know that they're there somewhere.
They're actually, so they're not on your host drive. They're within the VM because that data doesn't get mapped. I saw a curious case where somebody was actually mapping the raw file system where the databases were stored to prevent that kind of thing from happening. But I highly advise against doing that, because when you're virtualizing that kind of folder that's always being read and written to, you get into some weird things. That's definitely outside of the use case. In that event, if you can't Vagrant up, what I would try doing is launching Virtualbox and seeing if Virtualbox will be able to start the machine. If it can boot the machine, then you'll be able to get in with SQL Pro or something.
Yeah, it was totally hosed.
Yeah, if it gets to a point where it's that damaged, no, there really isn't any recovering at that point.
Okay, just curious.
So upgrading Homestead. So the main thing to do is just to git pull origin master Homestead, and that'll update the Homestead repo. Now there's two parts to updating Homestead. You want to update the code from the repo, and you also want to make sure that your box version is up to date. So you can check that by saying Vagrant box outdated, and it'll do a check, and it'll go out and it'll ask and say, hey, is this up to date? You can also say Vagrant box update, and it'll look at the latest installed version. Here I have 101 installed, and then the version constraints that we're requiring is version 1, so we have nothing else to do. We don't have to update. Now, the reason that you have to keep both of these up to date is because some changes we'll make in the Homestead repo and in the Homestead software itself, but some changes we make upstream. And those changes are made in a larger repo that takes a lot longer to set up. Homestead itself, the base box that you download, is actually built by a repo called Settler. And Settler takes about a 10 to 15 minutes to provision because it takes a blank Ubuntu box and installs all the stuff that Homestead has. And then once we install all that stuff and configure it, we take a snapshot of that box. We export that box out of VirtualBox, out of VMware, out of Parallels, package it into the box file, and then that's what we distribute. That way you have about a 60-second Vagrant up instead of a 15-minute Vagrant up every time you have to build the box. So when we update the box through Settler, we'll also have to push out a box, and everybody else will have to update their box version. So there's two different things you have to keep updated. And there are some instances where the box won't be compatible with the repo version. And I've got a table towards the end of these slides that kind of cover that and why. So Homestead isn't just for Laravel. If we go and add more mapped folders, you can map a Slim project in, you can map a Symfony app, and you can actually tell the sites what type of file or what type of project you're working on, we actually have, I have a typo on this that I completely forgot to update, but on the site's map, if you add a type to this key, this is just YAML. So on the Symfony site, if we added the type key with a value of Symfony, it would actually use a different Nginx configuration to serve that when it creates the Nginx site that's customized for Symfony debugging. You can also add multiple databases and create more databases. So here's the old Homestead versions. This was actually a big deal because Homestead went from PHP 5.5 to 7 to 7.1 really, really fast. PHP 7 was out for like a day and a half before we had Homestead support for it. We had PHP 7.1 the day it was released in Homestead. So we really try to keep up with the latest versions of PHP. So if you need to go back and use an old version of Homestead, if you want to use PHP 5.5, you want to use the software repo version 2.1.8. The box you want to use is actually a different box. The Laravel box that was for that version has a MySQL root password that has expired, which is a bug that we fixed in a later version. But I actually went back and found the right version of the base box to built it as my own box, and pushed it out as my own repository. So if you have an old project you need 5.5 support for, you can go use this box, and it's just an old version of Homestead. If you want to use PHP 7.0, you can go get 3.1 and then use the box version 0.60. If you're using VMware, it's box 0.61. That'll give you PHP 7 support. If you want to go with PHP 7.1, you need to use at least version 4 and any box version greater than 1. You can see we kind of fixed some of our Symver problems because a lot of historically Homestead hasn't been semantic versioned. Now it is, so it's a little bit easier to understand what's compatible with what. So the links here, the Laravel docs for 5.4, there's a Homestead doc there. That's a great resource. Virtualbox.org, vagrantup.com. I believe that is it for my slides. It is. Now we'll get to a little bit of actual real things. Do we have any questions?
Not yet.
Oh, excellent. All right. What's that font size? Is that pretty good?
Yep.
All right. So what I have here is I've just cloned this down, the Homestead repo. So I'll do sh init.sh, and that'll create the .homestead folder for me. If I swap over to PHP Storm, open up that folder. And we should have a Homestead folder around here somewhere. There it is. And we have our files. So this is the global Homestead method, or the global way of using Homestead. There's two different ways. In this method, we expect that you're going to be mapping multiple projects, and you're going to have one version of Homestead at all times running on your machine. This is a perfectly fine way of running Homestead. There's nothing wrong at all with doing it this way. What I traditionally like to do is I like to run Homestead per project. So if we go look at a project that I have, this is just a Laravel 5.3 app. This is the app that I actually teach my full day courses with. Let me undo those typos. If we look at our composer JSON, we'll notice that in the composer required dev section, we have Homestead. And this is actually an old version of Homestead. Let me make that a little bit bigger. If I can do the mouse gesture right. So with this being old, we actually need to change this to Homestead 4.0. So we can go to that folder, do a composer update, Laravel Homestead. We'll give this a second. This is called the per project Homestead installation, and these are on the this is all in the documentation. So If you look at the documentation, there's a per project installation guide. You can do that, or you can do the first guide, which is the global.
What's the benefit of doing per project?
The benefit of per project is if you are doing an open source project, or if you're contributing, or if you have contributors, if it's a team project, the per project is essentially putting the Vagrant environment in your project. So you can easily version control the things that you want to version control. And you don't have to worry about telling somebody how to set up Vagrant, or how to set up Homestead, or how to add it to their Homestead environment. All right. So
what is at this point?
Sorry, what was that?
Isn't that pretty ubiquitous at this point?
Not as much as you would think, really. I mean,
I'm sorry, I've just been stuck in Laravel for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's once you get like in a lot of people are still out there using MAMP and WAMP, and they just don't want to change. And I don't blame them. I mean, learning stuff is hard, right? But yeah, yeah, you would think that it's not going to be a big deal for people, but yeah, it is a big deal for some people. So since I just updated the version of Homestead, I want to go and run the Homestead make command again. That's not where it is. Vendor bin Homestead make. And I always run with these extra flags after, aliases. So what this make command does is this actually copies the files that you would need to run Homestead out of your project into your project's repo. It's essentially the same files that are created in your home folder when you run the init.script for Homestead. I run these two flags. One is for aliases, which copies that aliases file into my project, as well as after, which copies that after.sh into my project as well. Now, the one difference, or the big difference here with Homestead per project, is you don't want to version control your homestead.yaml. And the reason for that is to be able to run this per project, we actually have to hard code the path to the project in here. I went round and round and round trying to figure out a good way to handle this, and there just really wasn't. So the first thing we tell you is, don't version control your homestead.yaml. If you have to customize this, have something like the .env example where you can just copy and paste your customizations out of that. But here, this is essentially the same homestead.yaml you would have when you run Homestead globally. So from here, we can just do Vagrant up. And while that's running, oh, it actually changed my after sh. Did I have anything in there? Let's see, what did I have? Oh, I just didn't have anything in there. So the after.sh is really handy if you want to add something after Homestead runs. You can say apt-get install htop. You could even do something where you actually go through and there was one project that I was working on for a while that had Elasticsearch on the same server. So I went and had a ton of a giant shell script that would install and create Elasticsearch indexes for me. So this is that kind of way that you can customize Homestead without having to worry about copying and editing files that are going to be changed upstream on you. Oh, a virtual machine already exists. So when you get an error like this, you can do Vagrant global status, and that will show you all the virtual machines that you have and even some that are running. And you can see that I have a couple of projects still running, which I probably should have turned off. So let me halt those real quickly. That one. I also have I've managed to get two of these projects in, didn't I? Let's see. So I've got two projects in the same folder. I've really confused it. All right, let me wait for these other two machines to halt. So if you ever get into this scenario where you have some weird things happening, the first thing you can do is you can rmrf the .vagrant folder in your project. That will remove the copy of the VM that Vagrant has moved into this folder. And you can also launch Virtualbox. And you can see that we have our VMs and we have that QS VM. Let's get rid of that one. We'll delete all the files. We're also going to remove and delete all the files of this one. Now, when we run Vagrant Global Status, we just have that one running that I'm working on turning off. We have that one. Let's go here. Is that the right path? Yes. We can check our Vagrant status here. Not created, so let's go ahead and destroy. If you don't want to be prompted for the yes or no, you can just do Vagrant destroy F. So now let's check our global status again and make sure everything has calmed down a good bit, and it has. So let's give Vagrant up a try. Also, if you run multiple Vagrant machines at the same time, Homestead's configured to do port collision fixing for you. So be aware that these ports may change if you're running multiple Vagrant machines. There we go. Everything's up. And here you can see that it ran our install. It ran that after.sh and installed htop for us. So if we ASSHN, you can see that we have our QS folder. That's our Laravel app. So we can run ours and migrate, run dbseed, and we can also run htop because we installed htop. So now if I pull up a browser, we can visit localhost 8000, and we have our application, which I think is all behind a registration. Yep. So we have tasks, we have users, we have our widgets. And that's essentially Homestead per project. And now whenever I want to share this repo, and you can go find this repo on GitHub, and there's instructions on how to set everything up. Or there's not. Apparently I never updated the README. Excellent. That's okay. I have to rewrite this for 5.4 since it was just released as well. So that aliases file, this is what allows me to run just Artisan instead of having to do PHP Artisan. You can also have PHP Unit and PHP Spec. If you use those tools, will run out of the vendor bin PHP Unit. That's essentially why we use those different those aliases files. Now we are going to halt this Vagrant machine now that we've seen how per project works. And halting is essentially a sudo shutdown. You can also suspend, and it's kind of like putting the computer to sleep. I don't recommend you suspending your Vagrant machines. I have spent hours and hours and hours trying to debug Vagrant problems, and it come to find out the user was suspending their VMs, and that was doing really weird things to the Vagrant machine. So I would avoid suspending unless you just absolutely have to. All right, let's go back to our Homestead folder. We are going to close that project. We're done with that. We'll go back here. Now let's go here and let's add something that isn't Laravel. So let's say we're going to map this PHP Storm projects, this WordPress folder, and public. And we're going to map that to Vagrant WP. And we'll say WordPress. And then we'll map this to the same thing. Actually, we just need to do that, and then we'll say WordPress public. So now when we do Vagrant up from our Homestead folder, and let me swap to a different terminal. Screen size really big. Nope, come back. If we go and look at that folder, you can see that I've made this public folder, and that's just because Laravel and Homestead are looking for that public folder to serve the website from. So if we look at that public folder, you can see that we have a generic WordPress install. So if we open that up, and we'll need to edit our WordPress settings. And we need to go find the database configuration. And it's not the settings, it's the config that shows you how long it's been since I've edited WordPress. Go to this. So here we need to set up our database. And now because we're using Homestead, we know that there's a Homestead database already there. And we know that the Homestead is the database user, not Homestead. And the password is secret. And that's all we should have to do. Except let's kind of, yeah. Got to be a little secure here. So let's go look at Homestead. Homestead mapped everything. Let's go and do one more thing. We need to map our IP to our path, because this isn't a real domain name. So what we're going to do is sudo vi etc hosts. Oh, that's not my right password.
Spell it out loud.
Oh. All right, so we're going to paste our IP there, and we're going to map that to WordPress.app. We'll save that. We'll ping WordPress app just to make sure it works. It does. We'll go back to a browser. Let's see if WordPress.app is working. Hey, there it is. So our VM finished booting. We can Vagrant SSH into it. You can see there's our WordPress. There's our WordPress site. And now we can go through install WordPress. So Homestead's not just for Laravel. You can serve Symfony stuff. You can serve Slim PHP. Anything that you can map a path to, you can serve out of Homestead. And we have all the tools that you would expect to have. I mean, we have PHP 7.1. We have Node. We have NPM. We have Gulp. There's also a ton of other things that Laravel uses out of the box, like Redis and other tools like that that are already there, already configured. Most of them are all using the same kind of credentials. That's using something like Homestead for the username and secret for the password, like MySQL. There you are. All right, so now we have we have this WordPress application. What if we want to go work on something else? Well, all we have to do is go and add a new folder. In this case, we're going to map the OSME help site. And we'll label that OSME. We'll create a new I'm not sure what the structure is there, so let's go check that out. Oh, we just point it straight to, oh, no, it does have a public folder. So we will change that. We'll put that towards public. And now that since we've made changes here, they aren't going to be immediately reflected, but we also need to go update our host file again real fast. Hosts. Build a command. Oh, yes. All right, so now I should be able to ping that to 2. Yep, that works. But if we go to http osmehelp.org or .app, doesn't work. Goes to our WordPress site. Well, that's because we have to come back to Vagrant and we have to tell Vagrant to reload, not relog. Don't do relog. I highly don't recommend that. Oh, it's because I'm in the wrong folder, aren't I? Now we do it. So we have to be in the Homestead folder. So what this is going to do is essentially a sudo reboot. It's going to shut everything down and then it's going to bring everything back up. But it will reparse that homestead.yaml file and make sure that any changes that need to be made are made. It essentially recreates the sites. And now that I said that out loud, I may have that wrong. I may have to run the provision command. We'll see. So you see, now we have this extra share, but I didn't create our site, I'm willing to bet. So if we go back, refresh, and we can confirm that, nope, it did not create our site. So what we have to do, and the Homestead and the actual Vagrant command, told us what to do, is we need to do Vagrant provision. And that is what will actually reparse that homestead.yaml file and reprovision the box for us. Sorry, got that wrong the first time I explained it. Once this finish, now we can refresh and we'll see the OSME help site. And this is a site that doesn't even use PHP. I mean, there's no PHP happening here. This is all HTML and JavaScript. So we can Vagrant SSH in. Into the OSME folder. If we needed to npm install, we can. If we needed to run our gulp file, we can run our gulp file. I think it's a gulp build. Yeah, there we go. So now we have this one site we can work on, and over here we still have this other WordPress app we can work on. We can go add posts if we wanted to. Now, one of the other things that we do in Homestead, let me go find, let's see, let's close our WordPress project. Do I have a window open for that? I do. What's actually doing all the work behind the scenes is this homestead.rb. And if you look in the Homestead repo that you clone down in the scripts folder, you'll see homestead.rb. And it's Ruby, so don't be too afraid. It's not too horrible. But what you can see here is that we're essentially configuring Vagrant. And since Vagrant's written in Ruby, all of the plugins and all of the customizations are all in Ruby, which is why we have to use Ruby here. anything that you can see in this config VM define, the settings, the box, the version, the host name, this is all stuff that you can override and you can change through your homestead.yaml file. A lot of stuff that is in here is documented, but not everything. You can even go here and tell it to use, where's one of the examples? There's the guest OS, there's this GUI. That's one of the things that we don't have documented. So if we wanted to run GUI and show the GUI of the VM, we could go in and add this GUI key, GUI and settings, and we want to set it to true. We can go run exit and then Vagrant reload. And since Vagrant, since that settings change is a change to essentially the Vagrant file, which will tell the virtual machine how to act, it should be picked up, and it is. And you see right here, the window showed up for the virtual machine. So if you have something going on and you want to be able to actually show and see and interact with the VM at the VMware level, you can. We can log in. Yep, I know what it's going to capture. Let's close that as well. You can log. Oh, yep, really? Yep. You can log in as Homestead. The password is secret, or the password is not secret. Password may be Vagrant. And I am a liar. That's an excellent question. Actually, you know, I bet we disabled that. Interesting. Okay, so yeah, if you don't set the password, that's a good fun thing that I may have to go check out. All right. So the other things that you can do in Homestead that aren't really documented, if I can stop hitting the wrong key combinations. You scroll down, there are, where do we hide it? Oh, here it is. If you want to install MariaDB, and I think this may actually be documented now. If you want to use MariaDB, you can just say MariaDB true, and it will actually go out and download MariaDB and install Maria. Same thing for Mongo. You just have to tell it Mongo true in the config. There's also the same thing applies for HHVM if you want to set up a site with HHVM. And the other thing to note here is in the YAML file where you have these sites, if you wanted to tell Homestead that this was a site of a certain type, like we were talking about earlier, you can actually go tell it. If this was a Symfony app, you could go tell it the type was Symfony. And when it gets to the point where it wants to create the Nginx virtual environment, it'll actually set this type value. And then when it runs this creating site script, it looks for a serve script of that type. And you see here we have Symfony 2, we have Statomatic, we have Silverstripe, we have Laravel, we have HHVM. There's an Apache. That's a big undocumented feature, is you could run all of this under Apache if you really wanted to. A little bit of a note there, that's probably going away because I didn't even know Homestead did that until we got a bug report. No, we got a PR that somebody was implementing SSL on Apache. And I asked Taylor, I was like, is Apache in Homestead? And he goes, I don't know. And I went and looked and it was there. It was completely broken. I have no idea how this user was getting it to work, let alone fix SSL. So the first thing I did was go and fix the Apache support. And then we implemented his PR. And that was a new one on me. But if you really want to use Apache, you can.
Until tomorrow.
So when we run this different scripts for the building of the virtual host files, there are subtle differences between them. Like here we're using the Symfony, and Symfony has some different environment values that it looks for. Statomatic actually doesn't do anything other than this one rewrite, and it was an easy enough thing. We just went and added it. If you're using Silverstripe, they have some preferred defaults. So it's really easy to add these for yourself. So if you have a custom app, you can go in and hack this together yourself and add support for your own thing. We also support Blackfire SH out of the box. So if you're doing profiling with the Sensio Lab stuff, and you can just connect your keys, you come down here and you uncomment this Blackfire IO section, and you just add your client API keys, and it'll connect your virtual machine to your Sensio Labs account and show you all the performance stuff that's happening. It's really cool. I'm also working with Cal at Zend to try to get support for Z-Ray, which is a similar tool that Zend has. We're hoping to get that. We're going through all of the process of getting that approved by the Zend people, but soonish, I'm hoping we should be able to add Z-Ray to the tools that that Homestead will support. There's also the Postgres. Whenever you're creating databases, we automatically create MySQL and Postgres databases for you. There, you wouldn't necessarily use both, but you always get both. That's just kind of that made it really easy for us to do that. And then finally, the last thing I want to show you is Settler. And I believe I will probably have to clone it down because I don't think I have it on this system. Let's have a look. Oh, I do. Excellent. Let's pull up Stream Master, make sure it's up to date. All right, let's open Settler. So this is what you, the end user of Homestead, would never really need to use, but this is kind of a how we build the box. Essentially what we do is we have this build script that will install a Vagrant reload plugin that allows us to do Vagrant reboots and not have to start multiple processes to continue processing or configuring the Vagrant machine. And it also bundles the Vagrant into this little package for us and deletes some stuff that we don't need anymore. This is essentially how when we get ready to do a new release, I just run each one of these scripts, and magic happens, and 15 minutes later I have a box ready to distribute. The real magic happens in this provision script. If you ever want to provision a server from scratch to PHP 7.1, go look at this script, because this is exactly what I do every time. There's a training workshop that I'm doing next week at Sunshine PHP where I show people how to build a server from scratch using Vagrant, and I essentially took about 3/4 of this file. It's awesome because it's really easy to understand and really easy to follow. But you can see that we just go through and add a bunch of repositories. We add a bunch of PHP packages. We set a lot of defaults. We configure a lot of the settings to be the Vagrant user or the Homestead user. We install a bunch of the front-end tools we have. We install MySQL by default, since that seems to be what most people are using. We install a lot of settings. Actually, this is something we haven't released yet. This service called Mailhog. Mailhog is a Go library that you can install that will act as a fake mail server. It listens to SMTP ports, and it has a web interface. If you've ever used similar tools, it's probably like what you've used before. But the advantage here is this doesn't use Ruby. Mailcatcher is an app that Homestead used to have, but it was a giant pain because you had to install Ruby, and that took forever, and some of the gems would not work right, and then that was a nightmare trying to get all that set up and working. But with this being written in Go, we literally just have to run a handful of commands and copy a service file over, and we have that mail server running locally, so you can actually test and see mail without having to worry about really sending it. So that's one of the things that we haven't released yet, because this would actually require a base box update, right? Because we don't want you, the user, to have to spend time installing and wgetting Mailhog, even though this is only probably a 3-second thing. That's time that I would rather save you and put it into Settler, and that way you don't have to deal with it. Because you noticed on Homestead, the Vagrant ups on the Homestead boxes are only about a minute and a half, and I'm on a relatively newer MacBook Pro, but still, even on Windows, I see about the same performance. Running Settler is actually a 10 to 15 minute time investment. And it gets really old when you're trying and failing and you're trying to get new things to work and you have to wait the entire 20 minutes or 15 minutes for it to break and tell you what went wrong, and then you have to start all over from scratch. It's not always a good time. But yeah, that's Settler. That's essentially why the Homestead stuff is so fast, is because Settler is already doing all the heavy lifting. Do we have any questions? I believe that's about all the stuff I have to show you.
Sure. So, well, first off, thanks for doing this. I already knew some Vagrant and Homestead and thought that maybe I wouldn't get much out of this, but I've actually gotten a lot of ideas. So definitely thank you for doing this. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was the whole Settler thing. Just really gave me an idea, because I've been doing a pretty good job where I work, getting away from the the not built here mentality and getting to more publicly supported things and whatnot. And one of them was the fact that you can get Homestead going in minutes. As Paul was saying earlier, like, it does not really, there's nothing much to learn, right? What's the config file format, and you're up and running. That's what makes it so awesome. But I'm still dealing with the fact at my place that they want to use the same Puppet scripts that provision, the machines in the machine room to do developer VMs, right? And that process takes forever to get a developer up and running on their VM, and it's error prone and whatever. And we're just like, just use Homestead, right? But I think what the whole Settler idea has gotten me is that they can still do all their Puppet stuff. I just need to figure out the way to snap a picture of the box and then distribute that. Like,
have you heard of puffpet.com?
Yes, yeah, same kind of thing, really, where you go and pick your options.
Yeah, exactly. So what I actually did, I had the old agency I worked for in town. We didn't have a dev environment, and I essentially built one out of Puffpet, because we were using CentOS, and Puffpet made it really easy. And that's actually how I learned Puppet, was hacking at this. And after that, once you have the VM up and running, it's really easy. All you have to do is it's HashiCorp or Vagrant up. The instructions for, if you're using VirtualBox, it's really easy. Where's the documentation? Docs. Vagrant box, or Vagrant package. Where's the other command line stuff? Oh, command line interface. And packages right here. This is what you need. Once you get that VM to a certain point, all you have to do is run this Vagrant package and tell it what box you want to package. And this will spit out a Vagrant box for you that you can then distribute to people.
Yeah, I definitely think I have to look into this, because I'm getting tired of like having to constantly guide a developer through the process of getting our dev VM going.
Yeah, and what I did at the agency I worked for, because it was a proprietary CMS and I was packaging a lot of proprietary stuff in the box, I still had the box registered on HashiCorp on Atlas. So if you go to atlas.hashicorp, you can actually see how these boxes are managed. So you add a box and you add a provider. This is Homestead, right? This is the one we created 2 months ago. There's a Parallels version, there's a VMware version, there's a VirtualBox version. And you can go and add versions of these. And when you add a new version, you would actually add a URL. Let me go to something that isn't Homestead and isn't going to potentially affect a ton of people. If I do a new version, actually, let me go back and make sure I really don't do something. There we go. Yeah, this is a good one to do. So you can say here, you can do a new version. You can give it a version number, 2.0 and something here. You can create your version. Now you can create a new provider, and let's just say VirtualBox. And you can give it a URL. And here, what I did at the agency I worked for is we had a local box running on the network, and we had a specific DNS that was pointed towards it, and we had it configured to where you could only access that domain if you were inside the network. So I could actually put that URL here, and we could version the box and take advantage of all the versioning in HashiCorp and pushing out updates that this gives you. to make it so much easier to manage it, but nobody outside of the office could ever touch our box.
Right. Oh yeah, that's perfect. I got to do that.
So yeah, I mean, definitely look at that. If you run into problems, look at the settler repo, because there are going to be a few things you're going to want to do after stuff like enabling swap memory is what you're probably going to want to do, and then minimizing the disk image. This essentially writes out everything to nothing, all the free space. That makes your box size a little bit smaller.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely check that out. Any other questions?
Do you know about the hosts updater Vagrant plugin?
I have heard of such things. I have always been really anti Vagrant plugins, but I really because I've have a bad history of trying plugins and they fail miserably, or they weren't being kept up to date, and just getting into a nightmare mess where I was just eventually purging all of them. The host updater is supposed to be pretty good.
Yeah, I've been using it. I like it because I've been doing so. Looks like you do the one box per project, and I think I need to check that out too. So that's the other like newish thing that I learned.
Yeah,
but when I do a dozen sites on one box, that host updater is amazing because
I think
my host file up to date based on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great tool. I am an old school server administrator at heart, so I just think there's better ways of solving that problem. Like on Mac, there's a great app called Gas Mask, which will let you update your host files. It's not automatically. It's not going to automatically do anything for you, unfortunately, but you can actually create different versions of your host file and swap them out at will. And that's about the best option I try to point people towards, just because editing, like I'm going to sit here and VI my host file every day of the week, just because that's what I've been doing for years and years and years. But your average novice person who may just be trying to just now learning PHP or just now learning Vagrant, you don't want to send them down that road. So the host updater is definitely a good plugin for somebody like that to use.
Homestead's been pretty flawless for me. Like I said, it's up and running and everything's running great. I had one problem one time, and I, of course, was a great user, didn't report it at all or try to track it down, right? But is there a limit to the number of sites you can have? At one point, when I had too many sites, it would not provision them after a certain number.
I wonder what that number is. No, there shouldn't technically be a limit.
Okay, so it may be something that I had on my, like I said, all I did was delete a bunch of cruft and it worked again, and I didn't follow up or report anything. So if I come up with, if that happens to me again, I'll kind of report it. But
yeah, so that was one of the things when I became a maintainer, is I actually had Taylor go back and update, or he had issues on Homestead disabled completely.
Oh, wow.
And that was one of the things I told him. I was like, look, I'm going to be maintaining this. I don't mind supporting it. Let me handle that. Just enable the issues. And we actually have an awesome issue template now. So yeah, feel free to report anything there. Me and there's a friend of mine, Andrew Hood, who moved out to California, we're both really good about getting to those pretty quick. So yeah, no question to Dom. Throw a report up there and we'll get it answered.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions or anything?
Nope, I think we're good. Did a great job, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for coming. All right, I will talk to y'all later. Thanks, Paul.
All right, thanks, Joe. I'll catch up with you later.